He has exactly 24 hours, Mrs. Gable. My daughter Linda's voice was sharp, polished steel. We were in the leasing office at my retirement community, a place that smelled of disinfectant and false cheer. The scent of freshly cut grass wafted through the open door, a bitter contrast to the sterile room. His account is empty. The final notice stands. Linda slid a bank statement across the desk, the final balance of stark, brutal zero. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 4:00 p.m. The clock on the wall ticked with excruciating slowness. Mrs. Gable, the community manager, offered a tight, sympathetic frown. Linda just laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. "Don't look so glum, Dad. Think of it as an early inheritance. I was going to get it eventually anyway." Her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She turned to Mrs. Gable, her smile widening. "He's got nothing left. We both know he can't make the $2,800 payment." My daughter pronounced my financial debt sentence with the casual indifference of someone ordering coffee. My neighbor, Eleanor, who had been waiting to discuss the resident garden, gasped and looked away, her cheeks flushing with secondhand shame. Mrs. Gable pushed the official eviction order toward me, the bold red letters screaming, "Notice to vacate." Linda tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the signature line. "Just sign it, Dad. Let's not make this more embarrassing than it already is." The document felt impossibly heavy, the final chapter of a life I thought I had built with care and integrity. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I folded my hands on my lap, my knuckles white, but my breathing even. I met my daughter's cold, triumphant gaze with a stillness that seemed to unnerve her. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. She expected me to crumble, to beg, to rage. She expected a broken old man. She had prepared for tears and pleas, but she had no strategy for this quiet calm. She couldn't see the gears turning behind my eyes, calculating a different kind of balance sheet. The silence in the office stretched thin, taut as a wire. Linda's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She glanced at Mrs. Gable, then back at me, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. The scent of old paper and dried glue, a memory, a clue, filled my mind. I was about to speak, to change everything, to detonate the foundation of her victory. The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue, ready to unmake her. But months earlier, it all began with a single piece of mail. It was a simple, clean apartment in a retirement complex, my home for the 5 years since Irene passed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, the illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The trigger event wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but a bland, white envelope from the community's management company. A returned check for my monthly rent, stamped in aggressive red ink. Insufficient funds. It made no sense. The annuity always deposited on the first of the month, regular as a heartbeat. I called the bank first. The automated voice was maddeningly cheerful. After a 20-minute hold, a tired-sounding teller named Brenda came on the line. "I'm sorry, Mr. Evans," she said, her voice flat, "but the survivor annuity account shows a balance of $17.42. The number was so specific, so absurd, it felt like a punch. I asked her to repeat it. She did. I had built that fund with my wife Irene over 40 years of factory work. It was supposed to be my security. My first thought was a mistake. A glitch in the system. A bank error. It had to be. I told Brenda there was over $400,000 in that account just last month. A lifetime of overtime, of packed lunches, and carefully managed budgets. She put me on hold again. The silence on the line was a roaring in my ears. When she returned, her tone had shifted. "Sir, our records show a lump sum electronic transfer was initiated 3 weeks ago." The transfer was to a checking account under the name Linda M. Wallace. Linda, my daughter. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I ended the call, my hand trembling as I placed the receiver back in its cradle. I sank into my armchair, the one Irene always said had the perfect worn-in feel. Linda. It couldn't be. Not the little girl whose scraped knees I'd bandaged. Not the teenager I'd taught to drive. I remembered using the first annuity check after Irene's death to help Linda buy her first car. A reliable little sedan for her and my granddaughter. The memory was a fresh, twisting knife. She arrived that evening, bringing groceries I hadn't asked for, a performance of dutiful care. "Dad, you look pale. Are you eating enough?" she asked, bustling around my small kitchen. She put a carton of milk in the refrigerator and avoided my eyes. The casualness of her deception was breathtaking. I held the bounced check in my hand, the red stamp feeling like a brand. "Linda," I began, my voice steadier than I expected, "we need to talk about the annuity." For a moment, she feigned confusion, her brow furrowing in a pantomime of concern. "The annuity? What about it?" But when she saw the look in my eyes, the mask crumbled. A flicker of something hard and resentful replaced it. "Oh, that," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about it, Dad. I just borrowed a little. I had some bills to pay. A little?" I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. The chasm between her casual lie and the bank's brutal truth was terrifying. "Brenda at the bank said the account is empty, Linda. She said you transferred the entire balance." Her face hardened. The performance was over. "It was just an advance on my inheritance. I was going to pay it back," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's not like you're using it for anything important. Just sitting here in this place." The disgust in her tone as she gestured around my clean, simple apartment was more painful than the theft itself. She saw my life, my home, as worthless. I was too stunned to argue. My mind was a maelstrom of shock and grief. She saw my silence as weakness, as acquiescence. She pushed on, justifying the unjustifiable. "Mark and I had been struggling. The credit card debt. You have no idea. This money just solves things. It's better this way. You'll see. We'll take care of you." The promise was hollow, an insult layered on top of the grandest larceny. She was recasting her crime as an act of responsible family management. After she left, leaving the bag of pointless groceries on the counter, the silence of the apartment became a physical weight. I walked over to the bookshelf, where I kept a few things that truly mattered. Tucked between old engineering manuals was Irene's pride and joy, her old, meticulously kept photo album. It had a worn, dark green leather cover and heavy, cream-colored pages. The scent of old paper and dried glue was the scent of my life with her. It was a sensory anchor in a world that had suddenly come loose. Linda had seen me with it just a week before she emptied my account. I'd been on the sofa, slowly turning the pages. She'd rolled her eyes. "Dad, why do you waste time with that dusty old thing? It's full of faded pictures of people who are gone. It's worthless. You need to get rid of some of this junk." She had dismissed it, just as she had dismissed me, an irrelevant relic from a past she had no use for. The memory of her disdain was sharp and clear. The next morning, the first official notice arrived from the leasing office. It was a polite but firm letter, explaining my rent was overdue and that failure to pay within 10 business days would result in further action. The corporate, impersonal language felt more threatening than any shouted words. It was the first gear grinding in a machine I couldn't see, a machine designed to chew up men like me and spit them out. The deadline was a ticking clock I could hear in every quiet moment. I'd tried calling Linda again. This time, she didn't answer. I left a message, my voice strained, pleading for her to just talk to me, to help me understand. The call went to voicemail after 2 rings. She was screening me. The betrayal deepened, becoming an active, ongoing cruelty. She hadn't just made a mistake. She was now deliberately isolating me, leaving me to face the consequences she had created. The daughter I raised was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. Desperate, I called the annuity company. I explained that I believed a fraudulent transfer had been made. The customer service representative was professionally sympathetic but ultimately useless. "I understand your concern, Mr. Evans, but our records show the transfer was authorized online using your credentials. For security reasons, we can't discuss the details over the phone. Did you give your password to anyone?" His question hung in the air, a tacit accusation. I had, of course, to Linda, years ago, for emergencies. The conversation was a dead end. Without proof of coercion or a police report, their hands were tied. It was my word against the cold, hard data of a digital transaction I had, in my trusting foolishness, enabled. I felt a surge of helplessness, a feeling I hadn't experienced since I was a young man facing my first factory layoff. It was the feeling of being a cog in a machine, powerless to stop the crushing gears. This was my first crushing defeat. A few nights later, unable to sleep, I took a walk around the community grounds. The air was cool and smelled of night-blooming jasmine. As I passed the community center, I heard voices from the patio. It was Linda, arguing with her husband Mark on her cell phone. I stepped behind a large manicured hedge, my heart pounding. "I told you, it's handled," she hissed into the phone. "Just pay off the Visa and the MasterCard. All of it." "No, he doesn't know the details. He thinks I'm going to pay it back." Her laugh was a sliver of ice. "Pay it back? Be serious, Mark. It's our money now. He's 79. How much longer does he even need it?" The sheer breathtaking cruelty of her words stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't about desperation. It was about greed. It wasn't a loan. It was a theft, planned and executed. She was discussing my life as if it were a balance sheet with a rapidly approaching closing date. The last of my denial crumbled into dust, right there in the dark. I returned to my apartment, the jasmine scent now cloying and sour. The four walls felt like they were closing in. I sat in my armchair, the photo album on my lap. I didn't open it. Its weight was a comfort, a tangible link to a time when my world made sense, when love and trust were the bedrock of my family. Now, it felt like an artifact from a lost civilization. The cover, worn smooth by Irene's hands and mine, was a monument to a life my own daughter had just dynamited. The next week was a blur of dead-end calls and bureaucratic brick walls. I tried a legal aid service, but my case was deemed a family matter, not a criminal one, without more evidence. They suggested mediation. The thought of sitting across a table from Linda, negotiating the terms of my own betrayal, was sickening. Each call ended the same way, with a polite, "I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do." The system was designed to protect itself, and I was on the outside. Then the second letter arrived. This one wasn't polite. It was the final eviction notice. The language was stark, brutal, and legal. I had 2 weeks, 14 days to either produce the overdue rent or be forcibly removed. The date was circled in red ink by an anonymous hand in the leasing office. The ticking clock was no longer a quiet sound in the back of my mind. It was a deafening roar. Every tick was a step closer to the curb, the homelessness to complete and utter ruin. That night, I opened the photo album for the first time since the ordeal began. My hands trembled as I turned the heavy pages. There was Irene on our wedding day. There was Linda as a baby, a toothless grin on her face. Each photo was a ghost, a memory of a life that no longer felt real. Tucked into a small vellum envelope glued to the inside back cover was a small collection of important documents Irene always kept there: our marriage license, my military discharge papers, and something else. A folded piece of paper I hadn't looked at in years. It was the original policy agreement from the annuity company, dated March 12, 2019. Irene had insisted on keeping the physical copy, saying you could never trust a computer to remember what was important. I unfolded the crisp pages, my eyes scanning the dense blocks of legal text. Most of it was standard boilerplate, a forest of jargon designed to be impenetrable. But my finger stopped on a specific clause in Section 4B, under Security and Verification Procedures. The sentence was clear and unambiguous, a small island of clarity in a sea of legalese. All electronic fund transfers exceeding $10,000 initiated via the online portal, it read, require a secondary voice-recorded confirmation from the primary account holder. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat, a voice-recorded confirmation. I had never made such a call. I had never spoken to anyone to authorize the transfer, which meant if they had a recording, it was not of me. It was a lie. And a lie, unlike a shared password, was something tangible. It was evidence. This was the first glimmer of hope, a fragile flicker in the suffocating darkness. It wasn't a solution yet, but it was a path. A chance. I closed the photo album, the worn leather feeling less like a tombstone and more like a shield. Linda had called it a worthless, dusty old thing. She had no idea. Irene, in her quiet, meticulous way, had left me one last tool. not out of foresight for this specific betrayal, but out of a general principle of carefulness that my daughter had long since abandoned for convenience and greed. The next morning, I made the call. Not to the general customer service line, but to the fraud hotline listed in the fine print of the policy document. I summoned every bit of my retired factory worker persona, calm, methodical, and respectful of process. "My name is Peter Evans," I said, my voice steady. "I am reporting a suspected fraudulent transfer from my survivor annuity account. I believe my daughter impersonated me on a required voice confirmation call." I gave them the policy number and the date of the transfer. The woman, on the other end, a fraud specialist named Ms. Davies, was different. Her tone was serious, focused. There was no professional sympathy, only professional interest. "Mr. Evans, this is a very serious allegation. We do have a voice recording on file for that transaction. Our policy is to review such claims internally. Can you confirm you are willing to file a formal report, which may have legal consequences for the other party involved?" The question was a final doorway. I stepped through without hesitation. "Yes," I said, the word tasting of cold, hard steel. "I am." She told me the investigation would take 5 to 7 business days. 5 to 7 days. My eviction notice gave me 8. The ticking clock had a new, frantic rhythm. The hope I felt was now laced with a terrifying urgency. Everything depended on this one invisible piece of evidence, a recording of a voice pretending to be mine. It was a race between a corporate investigation and a constable at my door. The waiting was the hardest part. The days stretched into an eternity. I'd walk the community paths, the scent of cut grass now a countdown timer. I saw Linda's car pull into the visitor lot once. She was there to see Mrs. Gable, likely to finalize the paperwork for my removal. She saw me from a distance, gave a slight, irritated shake of her head, and hurried inside, clutching her purse. She was so confident, so sure of her victory, she had no idea the ground was shifting beneath her feet. During those days of waiting, a younger man from the legal aid service called me back. He'd found a file on a pro bono lawyer, a Mr. Chin, who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. "It's a long shot, Mr. Evans, but he sometimes takes compelling cases." This felt like a potential lifeline, an ally. I met him the next day. He was sharp, empathetic, and outraged by my story. He agreed to help, drafting a cease and desist letter to Linda and a formal inquiry to the annuity company. The flicker of hope grew brighter. Having Mr. Chen in my corner made me feel less alone, less powerless. He believed me. He saw the injustice. He sent the letters via courier that same afternoon. For the first time in weeks, I slept for more than a couple of hours at a time. It felt like the machine was finally, possibly, beginning to turn in my favor. But my relief was premature. This was the moment of false hope, the peak before the plunge. 2 days later, with my eviction now only 3 days away, Mr. Chen called me. His voice was heavy with frustration. "Peter, I have bad news. Linda's husband is a partner at a major downtown mall firm. They've responded. They claim you're mentally incompetent and that Linda was acting with power of attorney to protect your assets. They're filing for emergency conservatorship." The crushing defeat was absolute. She wasn't just stealing my money. She was trying to steal my name, my mind, my very identity. My own lawyer was now hopelessly outgunned. The conservatorship filing was a masterstroke on cruelty. It wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a public declaration designed to strip me of all credibility. Any claim I made, any protest I lodged, would now be filtered through the lens of their accusation. Senile, confused, unreliable. Mr. Chen admitted we'd be buried in paperwork and legal fees we couldn't afford long before we ever saw a courtroom. My one potential ally had been neutralized. I was back to being completely alone, with the clock about to strike midnight. I was at my lowest point. The eviction was now just 48 hours away. My hope had been extinguished. I sat in the armchair, the eviction notice on the table next to me, a death warrant for the life I knew. I picked up Irene's photo album again, its familiar weight a hollow comfort. It represented everything I had lost: my wife, my daughter's love, my financial security, my future. It was a catalog of my failures. Linda's words echoed in my mind. A dusty old thing? Worthless. Maybe she was right. The phone rang, shrill and jarring in the silent apartment. I almost didn't answer it. It was a number I didn't recognize. I expected another debt collector or final warning from the leasing office. I let it ring 4 times before picking it up with a sigh of resignation. Peter Evans speaking. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. Mr. Evans, this is Miss Davies from the annuity company's fraud department. I'm calling regarding your claim. My entire body went rigid. We've completed our investigation, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. We ran a vocal biometric analysis on the confirmation recording we have on file and compared it against a sample from a previous legitimate service call you made in 2021. The voice prints do not match. The deviation is statistically significant. It was the driest, most beautiful sentence I had ever heard. The words were clinical, but their meaning was a thunderclap. The voice on the authorization call is not yours. End. The revelation was so profound, so absolute, I couldn't speak for a moment. It was real. The proof was real. The voice, I finally managed to ask, my throat tight. Can you tell me whose it is? There was a slight pause. While we cannot legally identify the speaker, the vocal patterns are consistent with a female speaker, likely between the ages of 40 and 55. The transfer, Mr. Evans, has been flagged as high-confidence wire fraud. Wire fraud, a federal crime. The words detonated in the quiet room. Ms. Davies then laid out the next steps with chilling precision. Under federal banking regulations and our own internal policy, we are initiating a full clawback of the transferred funds. We will also be filing a suspicious activity report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. You don't need to do anything further on that front. The process has already begun. It wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about a machine far bigger and more powerful than Linda's husband's law firm, grinding into action. The final piece was the chargeback. The transfer to the receiving account will be reversed within 24 hours. The full principal, minus a standard processing fee, will be restored to your annuity account by tomorrow morning, Mr. Evans. We advise you to change all your online security credentials immediately. Tomorrow morning, the day of my eviction, I felt a cold, calm certainty settle over me. The trap was not just set. It was already sprung. The predator had become the prey. That afternoon, with less than a day to spare, I received a call from Linda. Her voice was giddy with triumph, dripping with false pity. Dad, Mrs. Gable just called me. She feels terrible about it, but they need the apartment. She said if your things aren't out by 4 p.m. tomorrow, they'll have to put them in storage. Don't worry, Mark and I will handle it. We'll come by the office with you to sign the final papers. Just be ready. This was it. Her final insult. Her last act of dominance. Okay, Linda, I said, my voice perfectly even. I'll meet you there. I hung up before she could say another word. I spent the rest of the evening in quiet preparation. I didn't pack. I didn't panic. I laid out my best shirt, the one Irene always liked. I made myself a simple dinner. I felt a profound sense of calm, the stillness of the eye of a hurricane I had created. The scent of old paper and dried glue from the photo album seemed to fill the room, a silent testament to the coming restoration. I checked my bank balance online at 8 a.m. the next day. The numbers were beautiful. $400,000 returned. It was more than money. It was my life, my dignity, my future, restored with a single electronic entry. I printed the statement. Then I made one more call to a teller at my local branch and arranged for a certified cashier's check to be drawn up for the full amount of my overdue rent. I was ready. The stage was set for the final act. We were back in the leasing office. The same room, the same sterile smell, the same clock ticking on the wall. A Tuesday afternoon, 4 p.m. Linda stood beside me. A look of smug sympathy plastered on her face. Mrs. Gable sat behind the desk, her expression genuinely pained, as she slid the final surrender documents toward me. I'm so sorry it has come to this, Peter, she said softly. Linda placed a pen in my hand. Just sign it, Dad. It's for the best. I ignored the pen. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the certified cashier's check. I slid it across the desk to Mrs. Gable. Her eyes widened as she read the amount, which covered not just the past due balance, but the next 6 months as well. I believe this settles my account, I said, my voice clear and steady. Linda stared at the check, her jaw slack. Where did you get that? That's impossible. You have nothing. Her confusion was delicious. Funny thing about that, I said, turning to face her fully. The annuity company has a very strict policy about voice-recorded confirmations for large transfers. It's in Section 4B of the agreement Irene made me keep in her old photo album. The one you called worthless junk. Color drained from Linda's face. She understood instantly. The mention of a recording wasn't an accident. It was a targeted strike. She knew what she had done. She knew what I now knew. They call it wire fraud, Linda, I continued, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. It's a federal offense. They're very serious about it. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Then again and again. A frantic, desperate rhythm. It would be her bank, her husband, the whole house of cards collapsing in a cascade of frantic text messages and frozen accounts. The chargeback was hitting her system. The empire she built with my life savings was turning to ash in real time. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic and a dawning, horrified understanding. The mask of the caring daughter, the shrewd inheritor, the competent manager, it all shattered, revealing the desperate, greedy child underneath. She opened her mouth to speak, to lie, to threaten, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. The evidence was absolute. The consequences were already in motion. Her world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of betrayal, was gone. Mrs. Gable, sensing the monumental shift in power, quietly slid the eviction papers back into a folder and pushed them to the side of her desk. She looked from me to Linda, her expression a mixture of awe and professional discretion. My neighbor Eleanor, who had once again been waiting nearby, was now watching openly, her hand covering her mouth in shock. The public humiliation was now being publicly undone, in the very same arena where it had been staged. We will fight this. Linda finally stammered, the words hollow and unconvincing. You have no proof. I don't need proof, Linda, I said calmly. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network has it. They have the recording, the one where you pretended to be me, your voice, your lie, preserved forever in a digital file. I imagine their lawyers are a bit more formidable than your husband. Each word was a nail in the coffin of her arrogance. Her phone continued its frantic buzzing, a soundtrack to her implosion. She fumbled in her purse for it, her hands shaking. She stared at the screen, her face turning a pale, sickly white. She was seeing the negative balances, the fraud alerts, the digital wreckage of her crime. The money wasn't just gone. It had been forcibly ripped back, leaving a crater of debt and legal exposure in its wake. The trap had been more perfect than I could have imagined. I thought of Irene then, just for a moment. I imagined her quiet satisfaction, not in the revenge, but in the restoration of order. She was a woman who believed in consequences, in balancing the ledger. She had left me the tools to do just that, hidden in plain sight, wrapped in the memories of our life together. The photo album wasn't just evidence. It was her final act of love, a way of protecting me even after she was gone. Linda looked up from her phone, her eyes pleading. The arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, primal fear. Dad, please don't do this. I can pay it back. We can fix this. It was the same hollow promise she'd made before, but this time it was stripped of all power. It was the desperate plea of the vanquished. It's a family matter, she whispered, echoing the words of the legal aid service that had first dismissed me. It stopped being a family matter the moment you left me with $17.42, I replied, the number as sharp and brutal as the first time I heard it. It became a legal matter, and now it's their matter. I nodded slightly toward the ceiling, indicating the vast, impersonal system she had awakened. You wanted your inheritance early. You got it. And now you get to deal with the taxes that come with it. The scent of freshly cut grass, which had once seemed so mocking, now smelled clean and fresh, like a new beginning. The air in the office no longer felt suffocating. I felt a lifetime of quiet deference, of being the accommodating father, the dependable old man fall away. In its place was a foundation of solid, unyielding stone. I had been underestimated. I had been dismissed. But I was not broken. Linda let out a small choked sob. It wasn't the sound of remorse, but of self-pity. The sound of a gambler who had bet everything on a sure thing, only to watch the wheel land on 000. She had gambled that I was weak, that I was ignorant, that I would simply fade away. She had lost on every count. She had never truly known me. She had never known the quiet strength forged over decades in a factory, the meticulous patience learned at Irene's side. I had nothing more to say to her. The conversation was over. The relationship, such as it was, had been cauterized. I turned to Mrs. Gable and offered a small, polite smile. Thank you for your patience in this matter. I'll see you at the resident garden meeting tomorrow. The simple, mundane statement was the ultimate declaration of victory. I was staying. My life was continuing. Hers was about to be dismantled, piece by painful piece. Without another glance at my daughter, I turned and walked out of the leasing office. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. The world felt solid under my feet again. I didn't look back to see her collapse into a chair, to see her final, desperate attempts to call her husband. I didn't need to. I could hear the faint, frantic buzzing of her phone all the way to the door. It was the only sound that mattered now. Back in my apartment, the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of despair, but the clean, quiet peace of resolution. I walked over to the bookshelf and picked up Irene's photo album. I ran my hand over the worn leather cover. It was not a dusty old thing. It was an archive of love, a vault of memories, and, as it turned out, an instrument of perfect, righteous justice. It had done its final job. My phone rang. It was Mr. Chen, the pro bono lawyer. Peter, what on earth happened? I just got a frantic call from Linda's husband's senior partner. They're withdrawing the conservatorship petition. They're talking about a federal investigation. They sounded terrified. I could hear the smile in his voice. It seems, I said looking at the photo of Irene on our wedding day, that I had a better lawyer on my side all along. Later that evening, Eleanor from next door knocked on my door. She held out a small plate with a piece of homemade apple pie on it. I saw what happened in the office, she said, her eyes kind. I just wanted to say, good for you, Peter. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. It was a recognition not of vengeance, but of resilience. It was an acknowledgement that I was still a member of this community, not an outcast to be pitied. I never heard the full details of what happened to Linda and her husband. I read in the local business journal a few months later that he had resigned to pursue other opportunities. The corporate euphemism for a spectacular fall from grace. I heard a rumor that they had to sell their large house in the suburbs to cover legal fees and restitution. The great machine of consequences, once started, did not stop until the account was balanced. My life returned to a quiet rhythm. I paid my rent on time. I tended to my small plot in the resident garden, coaxing tomatoes and basil from the rich soil. The annuity, my annuity, deposited its monthly payment into my account, as regular as a heartbeat. The wound of the betrayal remained, a scar that would never fully fade, but it no longer ached with the poison of helplessness. It was a reminder of a battle fought and won. My granddaughter, Lucy, called me a few times. She was confused, caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand. Her mother had told her a tangled story of misunderstandings and bank errors. I didn't correct her. I just told her I loved her and that the door was always open if she wanted to visit me. The sins of the mother would not be visited upon the daughter, not by me. That was a choice Linda had to live with. One afternoon, I was sitting in my armchair, the sun warming the room, and I opened the photo album again. I turned the pages slowly, not with sorrow or anger, but with a sense of peace. The faces smiled back at me, frozen in moments of joy and love. They were not ghosts. They were my history, my strength, the foundation upon which I had stood when the world tried to sweep me away. Linda had tried to erase that history. She had thought my sentimentality was a weakness. She saw the love for my late wife, the memories I cherished, as liabilities. In her transactional world, anything that couldn't be sold or leveraged was worthless. But she was wrong. It was that very sentiment, that deep connection to my past and to the integrity Irene and I built our lives on, that had been my ultimate weapon. Love, it turned out, had the sharpest teeth of all. The past was not a burden. It was an arsenal, and my memory, which she had tried to have declared incompetent, was the key that unlocked it. She would never understand that. Her world was built on the shifting sands of want and convenience. Mine was built on the bedrock of 40 years of shared laughter, quiet promises, and the meticulous keeping of records in a worn, green photo album. In bedrock, I had proven, always wins. I closed the album and placed it back in its honored spot on the shelf. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. My apartment was quiet, clean, and mine. The scent of Eleanor's apple pie lingered faintly in the air. I picked up my keys from the table and walked out the door, locking it firmly behind me.